Hello everyone, welcome to my JavaScript course. My name is Fahad and I'll be going through almost 50 different topics of JavaScript in this course. Before I dive into the course, I just wanted to talk about who should watch this course. I made this course for people who are just getting started with programming or people who already know a programming language and they want to learn JavaScript. I made this course for them. As I'm going through each and every topic of JavaScript, I've maintained the code and I've pushed that code on my GitHub account. I've put the link of that GitHub repo in the video description. So if you get stuck somewhere, you can compare your code with the code which is on GitHub and solve the problem. If you have any questions, you can always ask those questions in the comment section below. I'll be very happy to answer those questions. If you like the video, please give a thumbs up. If you want to support the channel, please subscribe to the channel. And in the next section, I'm going to talk about what all topics that we're going to cover in this course and then get started with the course. I'm going through almost 50 topics of JavaScript in this course. This course is almost 3 hours long, so I decided to divide this course in 3 parts. In first part, I'm going through very basic topics of JavaScript, like its history, how you can create hello world program, what are switch statements, while loop, for loop, functions, events. So I'm going through very basic topics of JavaScript in part 1 of this course. In part 2, I'm going to dive a little deeper into the advanced section of JavaScript, where I'm going to talk about how you can create classes, how you can create objects from your classes, what are class methods, what are string and number methods. And then I'm going to talk about arrays. Arrays is the most important data structure in any programming language. I'm going to talk about its basic methods, how you can create an array, how you can add and remove elements from an array. And then I'm going to talk about some of the mostly used methods for an array. And then in part 3, I'm going to talk about math and date objects. And then I'm going to talk about what's the difference between let, var, and const keywords, how you can debug your JavaScript program, what are JavaScript errors, what mistakes that you can make in this programming language, and what are the best practices to use it. Now you can see that I'm going through a lot of topics in this course. So I want you to practice each topic with me in your IDE. If it doesn't work for you, then you can check the code on GitHub repo that I mentioned before. And if you have questions, you can always ask these questions in the comment section below. In the next section, I'm going to talk about what JavaScript is and a little bit about its history. A web page is made of 3 main components: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, which is used for putting controls on your page. Controls like text boxes, drop-down list, checkboxes. And CSS is used for styling these components. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet Language, which is used for setting position of these components, even setting animations for them. That all could be done in CSS. JavaScript, on the other hand, is used for processing the data that we receive from these components, sending them to an API or a database so that we could store that data. From booking an Airbnb to ordering food on your phone, that all could be done in JavaScript. Let's talk a little bit about its history. In 1993, first web browser was released. It was called as Mosaic web browser. Mosaic web browser was the first graphical user interface web browser made available to non-technical people, and it gained popularity with World Wide Web. It needed to be polished, so the lead developers at Mosaic founded a company called its Netscape Corporations. Netscape Corporation released their first browser called as Netscape Navigator in 1994. Netscape Navigator was a very polished browser and it was very well liked by people. Almost 80% of people started using Netscape Navigator as their web browser. But the web pages were still static. You cannot really interact with web pages. You can read text and navigate between pages, but you could not click on a button and get something done. It needed a language which could make web pages interactive. For that, Netscape took 2 routes. They went to Sun Microsystem and asked them to make a language which could look like Java, Java was very popular back then, and it would have made it easier for Java developers to program in this new language. Also, they hired this engineer named Brendan Eich and asked him to make a language which could make web pages interactive. Brendan Eich came up with this language called as LiveScript in literally 10 days. And they decided to ship this language with the next release of Netscape Navigator. 3 months later, they decided to rename this language to JavaScript, and the first version of JavaScript was released in December 1995. That was totally a marketing decision. JavaScript has nothing to do with Java. Netscape wanted JavaScript to become as popular as Java so that developers could make interactive web pages for Netscape. And it did become famous, and developers started making interactive web pages for Netscape. In 1996, Microsoft released their version of web browser called as Internet Explorer. And Internet Explorer introduced JScript as their version of JavaScript. JScript was reverse engineered from JavaScript, but it was a little different, and it became difficult for developers to make their web pages work in Netscape and Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer took 90% of the market because it was shipped free with Windows, and finally Netscape submitted JavaScript to ECMA International, which is European Computer Manufacturers Association. Netscape wanted ECMA International to standardize specification of JavaScript so that all the browsers could conform to it. And that resulted into ECMAScript 1 in 1997. ECMAScript 2 was released in 1998 and ECMAScript 3 was released in 1999, but after that it kind of faded away with popularity of Internet Explorer. Until 2008, when Google released this awesome browser called as Chrome, Chrome had V8 engine which could process JavaScript very fast. The key innovation was just-in-time compilation. Then there was this desperate need for ECMAScript to come together and release a strong version of JavaScript. And that's what happened in 2009 with the release of ECMAScript 5. ECMAScript 5 was one of the biggest releases, and it had happened almost after a decade. After making JavaScript stronger, UI frameworks like Angular, React, and Vue started emerging. And then in 2015, the last major release of ECMAScript was released, ECMAScript 6, and it made JavaScript more organized, developer-friendly, and easy to learn. To get started with learning JavaScript, you don't really have to install any tool on your machine. There are so many online editors that you can use for practicing JavaScript. One of my favorite is jsfiddle.net, where you can write HTML, JavaScript, and CSS code, and you can see the results on the right-hand side. You can print your results in the console log like that, or you can print your results on the page too. So you can almost do everything that could be done on local machine in jsfiddle.net. For this tutorial, I'm going to use Visual Studio Code because you can have nice IntelliSense, you can run and debug your code, you can share your code with others on GitHub, and there are some cool extensions that you can use to make your development faster. This tool is cross-platform. That means you can install it on Mac machine, Windows, or Linux. I'm using Windows. I'm going to click on this stable download button here. It's going to take me to the download page, and you can see that how tiny this editor is. It's just 60 megabytes. And in the future, if you want to learn TypeScript, Python, Java, and C++, you can use the same editor for that. I have already installed this editor on my machine. And in the next section, let's go ahead and create our first Hello World program in JavaScript.